Ken's gonna. Oh, there's Pat. Alan, how are you? All right. Guess I'll sit here. Do we need? Ken, are you sitting here?
I'm going to be here.
You're going to be there. Okay. So we don't need 4 seats then, right?
Oh, we probably don't.
Okay. All right.
I didn't know having 2 Marys was coming. When you guys do your sort of opening remarks, if you want to, feel free to come to the podium. Either sit here and do it.
Oh, okay.
On the podium, whatever you want.
Okay.
My name is Ed Breslin, and I am your classmate. So anyway, you were Pat Jalen then. No, Pat Pease, right?
Okay, we probably should take this conversation to Dorothy. How are you, Norm? That's good.
That's nice, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I think we're going to get started here. Time flies. So my name is Ken Pruitt. I am the town of Winchester's Sustainability Director, and delighted to have you here tonight for this event at the Jenks Center. It's going to be a panel discussion with Senator Jason Lewis and Senator Pat Jalen. Representative Mike Day and Representative Michelle Socolo unfortunately could not be here, but we have Talia Quinn, the legislative aide for Mike Day, with us tonight. And Rep. Socolo sends her regrets, but she's actually on a multi-day tour of innovative recycling centers in Europe. So good knowledge that she'll bring back here, and I think Senator Lewis might even add some comments describing that trip. So the topic for tonight is state climate and sustainability legislation. What's already been filed, what's coming, what can we expect, and we're delighted to have this panel here tonight with us. This event is part of Winchester's Climate Solutions Week, the second ever Climate Solutions Week in town. And it's a series of multiple events all week. You can see the full list. We're roughly halfway through the week. At that table right there, there's a flyer that looks like this, and on the back it lists all the events. We have some exciting ones still coming, including tomorrow and all the way through Saturday. We have a tour of the transfer station to learn all about how we recycle and compost, et cetera, at the transfer station. So hopefully you'll join us 10 o'clock for that event, as well as the other events we have this week. I just want to thank the Jenks Center for hosting us tonight. I also want to thank WinCam for live streaming and recording the event. Thank our panelists, of course, for being here tonight. Members of the Climate Action Advisory Committee who are here tonight, thank you. I want to thank specifically Rachel Whitehouse, who's in the back, who's been very helpful with publicity and brainstorming this week with me. And all of you, of course, for being here tonight. And what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the speakers one at a time and have them just give some opening remarks. And then we're essentially going to just have an extended question and answer session. So prepare to ask the questions that you want answered. We're going to start with Senator Lewis. So Senator Jason Lewis represents the 5th Middlesex District, which is Malden, Melrose, Reading, Stoneham, Wakefield, and Winchester's in precincts 1, 2, 3, and 8, so basically the eastern half of town. And Senator Lewis was elected to the Senate in 2014 after having served as a state representative from 2008 to 2014. He's the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Education and Chair of the Senate Ethics Committee. He also co-founded and co-chairs the legislature's Zero Waste Caucus, along with Rep. Michelle Socolo, and also the Middlesex Fells Caucus. Senator Lewis is a Winchester resident and a town meeting member, and take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ken. And good evening, everybody. It's great to join you again this year for Climate Solutions Week. And thank you to Ken and everyone who's been involved in putting together Climate Solutions Week here in the town. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. I certainly see some faces I recognize and some new faces as well. You know, we just the summer just wrapped up, and you know, this summer, again, you know, we continue to see the devastating, you know, impacts of climate change locally in other parts of our country and all around the globe. And it just continues, I think, to impress upon all of us just the sense of urgency, you know, that we need to feel in terms of the efforts that we need to undertake, you know, individually in our own households, locally in our own communities, regionally, nationally, you know, and globally, to both continue to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and make the transition to clean renewable energy as fast as we can, you know, and at the same time to also focus on adaptation and resilience to better prepare our communities for you know, the kinds of extreme weather conditions, you know, that we saw this summer and unfortunately we're going to continue to see in the years to come. You know, on a positive note, I think, you know, we live in a community here in Winchester that takes issues of climate and sustainability very seriously, has focused on them for a long time. And we live in a state, you know, Massachusetts, that similarly, you know, has worked on these issues for a very long time, going all the way back to the 2008 Global Warming Solutions Act. You know, in recent years, Senator Jalen and I, along with, you know, Representative Day and Representative Socolo and our colleagues, you know, have been very pleased to help work on and pass two very significant climate-related bills. Many of you have advocated forcefully for those bills and many of the provisions that got, you know, folded into these bills. Back in March 2021, we passed what's called the Next Generation Climate Roadmap Bill. And that's the bill that has set a legally binding a target for the state to reach net zero emissions by 2050, and also it has set interim targets that we need to hit in our state across all sectors of the economy. That bill also set up some, you know, very significant investments in offshore wind development, in hydro and solar. That bill also introduced officially environmental justice considerations for the first time in our statutes, and that's become increasingly important to our environmental work. And there's a lot of other things in that bill as well. And then in August of last year, just at the end of the legislative session, we passed what's known as the DRIVE Act, an act driving clean energy and offshore wind, which is kind of a very significant follow-up to the Next Generation Roadmap, and continues to support our efforts to invest in clean renewable energy, and also does a lot more to address both the transportation sector, you know, in terms of transitioning to clean electric vehicles and electric buses, and greater support for public transit. I know Senator Jalen's going to talk about that, and also the building sector, and what we need to do to transition our buildings over to heat pumps and other, clean sources. So those, at this point now, those bills are being implemented by state government and other agencies. As I'm sure you're aware, Governor Healy, when she was campaigning and since she became governor, has made climate one of her top priority issues. She named the first climate chief, climate czar, if you will, in our state's history. We've never had somebody in a role like that before. So that person's focused on all efforts all across state government. We have had some setbacks. Our offshore wind procurements, unfortunately, because of inflation and supply chain issues and rising costs, we're probably going to have to renegotiate those contracts for several of our large offshore wind farms. But I'm hopeful, they will get rebid, and we will move forward on those. We do have the opportunity to be one of the largest producers of offshore wind energy anywhere in the world. The area just south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket is exceptionally well suited for offshore wind development. And then the hydro project that was going to bring hydro from Quebec down here also hit some road bumps, as you know, but it does appear that that's also now moving forward as well. So there's a lot of bills that have been filed in the new legislative session, which we started in January. There's some very terrific bills around further building on what we have done, a climate bank, the HERO bill, bills around energy facilities siting, electrifying of the commuter rail, some really excellent bills. So, I'm sure we'll talk more about those, and I'm sure you may have some feedback and questions on a number of those bills. So I won't say anything more about those right now, but those are all under consideration as we are working our way through the legislative session. One of the topics that came up last year when we had this session was concerns around our state school building program, which is the MSBA, and kind of how they were behind the times. I'm pleased to report that our advocacy and pressure on them finally got them to update their incentives that they provide for new school renovations and new school buildings. So now we will be seeing our new school buildings much more of an incentive to go all electric. And I expect we'll continue to see more from the school building authority, because school buildings are typically the largest emitters in our local communities. So that's progress, and again, that was something we talked about last year. The last thing I wanted to bring up was the Zero Waste Caucus, which, as Ken mentioned, I had the privilege of founding the caucus. So it's a legislative caucus. It brings together legislators who are like-minded in terms of the interest in this topic area. And I co-founded it with Representative Michelle Sicolo, who also represents part of Winchester. And we have been, working hard to kind of educate colleagues, to work with experts, and hold, various forums and things. And we have prioritized legislation dealing with three main areas: updating the bottle deposit law in the state, the bottle bill, which unfortunately failed at the ballot a number of years ago, but we can do that through the legislative process. Second is to implement extended producer responsibility, and Talia is going to talk about that because Rep. Day is the lead sponsor on the major EPR bill that we're hoping to get done. And then the third main focus for us is single-use plastics, the scourge of plastic. Most of our single-use plastics don't get recycled. It's less than 10%. They end up in landfills, they get incinerated, polluting environmental justice communities, or they end up in our parks and roads and then into our waterways and our oceans. So Rep. Sicolo and I have a very broad omnibus single-use plastic reduction bill, and that's something we're pushing hard for. Governor Healy just announced last week that going forward, she would prohibit all state agencies from continuing to purchase single-use plastic bottles. So that was a nice step, and we need to, obviously build on that. The other exciting thing is that a new coalition was just formed and rolled out a few weeks ago called Plastic Free Mass. Plastic Free Mass. And we would welcome, it's an advocacy coalition, groups like Conservation Law Foundation, ELM, other leading environmental groups are all members, but the coalition really wants to have local groups joining as well, so it would be great to have Sustainable Winchester join the coalition, other organizations that you may be part of, have them part of this coalition as well. So you would just need to contact Kirsty Pecci. Some of you know Kirsty, but if you don't, just connect with my office and we'll connect you. And we want to grow that coalition as much as we can, because that will help us to pass hopefully significant plastics reduction legislation this legislative session. That's one of my top priorities. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Senator Lewis. We appreciate it. We'll circle back to you during the Q&A, of course. Next, I'd like to introduce Senator Pat Jehlen. She represents the 2nd Middlesex District, which includes Cambridge, Medford, Somerville, and precincts 4 through 7 in Winchester, which is basically the western half of town. She is the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Elder Affairs and also of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. She served in the House, the Massachusetts House of Representatives from 1991 to 2005, and in the Senate from 2005 all the way up to the present. And she lives in Somerville, and we're so glad to have you here. Take it away.
Thank you. And I want to get to the questions, but I thought a lot about tonight because there's a lot to think about. And I put it into bad news and good news. So the bad news, obviously, is that climate change is here. And the good news is we can see it, and no one can ever deny it at this. Well, they can, they do, but it's getting to be undeniable. And so the good news is that there are more and more groups and coalitions, strong environmental activists working together, young people, old people, groups that are focused on young people, groups that are focused on old people, groups that are focused on everybody. It's really exciting. On the other hand, there are many solutions, and it's an intersectional problem. It's not just fixing energy. It's not just fixing transit. It's fixing, if the energy sources are important, conservation is important, fixing transportation so that people take public transit and bicycles and walk. But the main responsibility we have, in my view, is for public transit. It's not just a question of those things, but it's a question of housing. Where is housing? So that can people live near where they work? If they can't live near where they work, and people are being priced out of the suburbs into the far west, poor people are having to drive into Winchester, for example, if they're going to be working in a hospital or taking care of old people. That's what I care. As chair of Elder Affairs, I think about that all the time. It's a question of zoning, which has to do with that. It's a question of labor. In our committee, in the Labor Committee, we are considering bills to make it about apprenticeship and making it more possible for people to go into clean energy jobs. But I'm going to say that what I really and it's of course about environmental protection, protecting trees, and in some cases it's a choice between trees and solar energy. And there are fights in different parts of the state about how much farmland or trees to destroy in order to make solar farms. But the part that I want to talk about probably most, because Ken talked to us about some spending opportunities, things that we need to do, will cost money. This is a very, very expensive problem to solve. And I think the good news is that these coalitions and groups have come up with many, many solutions. And we have to choose. We have to prioritize. We have to see not only what provides the greatest benefit, but what's the most possible. And those are not easy. The opposition is very powerful, as you know. There is no way to take on the gas and oil industry without a lot of work. They are disguising themselves. They are greenwashing themselves. They are telling. I got emails today, you all probably did too, from oil companies that want to continue to sell oil to homes. I got a few from Winchester. They want to use biofuel, which is a mixture of biodiesel and, what is it? Something else that is a fossil fuel. But this is going to, they want us to not, the state government is trying to ban that. And they say this is the way to, this is better. So I'm just saying these are very difficult, but the biggest problem is the money. Do you want me to talk about taxes and incentives and spending right now? You had 3 bills that you talked about.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, we'll let me see what, it's 7:30 now. I think if you want to just sort of focus on maybe 1 or 2 of your own top priorities legislatively,
Well,
that might be an option.
Obviously you do small things that you can do quickly. I put in money for resiliency at the Amelia Earhart Dam to stop flooding, and it's $10 million. That's not a lot. It's a lot of money, but it's only enough to do the design to raise the Amelia Earhart Dam. And then we're also working with DCR to create resiliency at the park that's next to the dam. I have, Christine Barber and I have worked to get funding for the next phase of the Green Line extension, which was taken out when the price went up so much. But my top priority actually is public transit. So I have a bunch of ideas about that. And once again, there are competing priorities even within that. The cheapest is bus lanes, but it's very important to increase reliability and frequency and accessibility, and that will take money, because the only way to get more drivers and repair people is to pay them a living wage. And they have discovered that at the MBTA. To their surprise, when they couldn't get enough people and they raised the pay, more people applied to be drivers and managers. So, but in addition to that, we need to look at all the bus routes. The MBTA is reorganizing the bus routes, and many people are going to lose service. Other people will get more service. We need more. It needs to be reliable, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be affordable. And so my other priority within transit is fare-free buses. Fare-free buses move more quickly because they don't have to stop and let people on, pay. So they're more quick. They attract more people in all the pilots that have been done. They attract more people. They don't cost that much net because they're moving more quickly, and they don't have the costs of collecting all the fares. So for example, the T is going to spend $1 billion to start collecting fares in a different way. Well, they wouldn't have to spend some of that if the buses were fair. And buses serve the people who need public transit the most, who can't afford cars, who need to get from one place to another and work. They serve essential workers, they serve low-income people, serve people of color. So the fare-free buses is something that I've been working on, so far unsuccessfully. And so, for example, I tried to get $20 million in the transportation bond for a pilot. It wouldn't take that much, but we didn't get it. So I'm giving you failures as well as successes.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Senator Jalen. Effective and reliable and frequent mass transit is just so critical to reduce greenhouse gases from the transportation sector, but also to, as you say, enable people to lead meaningful lives without having to drive long distances. It's absolutely critical, and we seem to hear nothing but more and more stories in the news about the problems at the T. So keep pushing. I think next we'll hear from Talia Quinn. So she is the legislative aide to Representative Mike Day, who couldn't be here today. But I will just briefly say a couple of things about Rep. Day. He represents Stoneham and Winchester, all of Winchester except Precinct 6, which is represented by Michelle Socolo, who couldn't be here tonight. He's the House Chair of the Joint Committee on the Judiciary. He's been a member of the House since 2015, lives in Stoneham with his wife and 3 children, and Talia is kindly here to represent him tonight, and go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. Representative Day was disappointed he couldn't make it, but I'm happy that I get to be here. So I want to leave a lot of time for you guys to ask your questions, and I'll let the senators take the lead on some of that, but I would be happy to walk you through some Representative Day's priorities first before we turn it over. So first, as Senator Lewis mentioned, one of Representative Day's biggest priorities this term is his extended producer responsibility bill. So this essentially will hold manufacturers and producers responsible for the materials that they're putting out. So say right now you order something small, you order like an 8-ounce base lotion off of Amazon, and they send it to you in this giant package. And inside this giant package, it's full of plastics. And in the inside of this cardboard, it has chemicals on it so that it's not recyclable. So now instead of leaving it up to the municipalities to kind of deal with this recycling and get rid of it on their own, it's going to charge fees to the corporations who are unwilling to switch to more renewable materials. And it's going to give some of that money back to the municipalities to deal with it. Another thing that he's focused on, also as Senator Lewis kind of touched upon, is building decarbonization. The Stoneham High School project, when it's complete, it's had to go through a lot of budget cuts, but due to the advocacy of Senator Lewis and Representative Day, they've been able to keep it green and keep it reusable. So as of right now, if everything goes according to plan, it'll be one of the most energy efficient high schools in the Commonwealth. A couple of other priorities. Representative Day is really interested in getting some federal funding to the states and the municipalities for them to use for their own projects to kind of convert to some cleaner, greener energy solutions. We're anticipating, hopefully, an omnibus climate bill this session. What that will entail is still kind of up in the air. But yeah, I'm happy to turn it over to you guys to hear what you want to learn more about, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Talia. And I just want to step forward and volunteer to accept some of that federal money if Rep. Day can find a way to
Of course.
direct it to us. We're ready to use it for productive purposes right here. So thanks very much. Okay, we'll open it up to questions. Who has the first question? Right here.
My question concerns the electric grid, both security of the grid, availability, and reliability. What kind of legislation is the state having for the utilities to protect the grid, both from cyber attack and from physical attack? I think we've all heard about substations that have been attacked by AR-15s in North Carolina and Washington State. Yet here, we take a look at our substations in Horn Pond, in Wakefield. There doesn't seem to be any protection. There's no concrete wall around it. Substation that's being built in the Cape for Vineyard Wind that in fact does have a concrete wall around it. So it seems as though that we need to have better security for our electrical grid. And then in regards to availability, I think as we all know, the gas turbine power plant in Everett is going to be shut down, I think, next year. And that's a substantial amount of power that's going to be disappearing. And so, yet there's more power coming, hopefully from Hydro-Quebec, if the PUC guarantees some kind of rate increase. So, so my concern is, okay, as we have more and more solar, and I'm a big advocate for solar, more solar, more wind, what are we doing when the sun doesn't shine at the night, or during the night? And so, is there incentive to develop battery stations? Like in many states, Texas in particular, has a lot of battery generation or storage. And so what we're doing about that And so therefore the reliability of the grid and the availability of the grid. So what can the legislators do about that to ensure that we're protected in the future?
And let me, before anyone jumps in on, let me just say, feel free to direct questions to a specific panel member, or just as the last speaker did, just sort of out in the open. And then of the three of you, feel free if one of you wants to jump in, two of you, all three of you, but however you like. You don't have to all respond to every single question, just in the interest of time, but feel free. So whoever wants to go first.
Could you repeat the question?
So the question is,
Well,
I think
yeah,
we got it. I think we got it. Yep.
Yeah, from the microphone.
Yeah, I think it's a critical issue, which is basically the reliability and security of the electric grid. So, if we're going to make this transition in, obviously in our transportation sector to electric vehicles and buses, and if we're going to make the transition in our buildings, we have to have a grid that can supply the amount of electricity that we need for all these uses, and it is a tall order. In terms of battery storage, there are incentives in particularly in the bill we passed last year, which are intended to help support the development of large-scale storage in Massachusetts. We do have a number of, I've visited some of them, installations that we already have for storage, but the goal is to get to larger scale. And there's a lot of great technological development, as you know, going on in our state. We're a hotbed in this space in particular, and around advanced storage coming out of MIT and a lot of our other higher education institutions in terms of research and development. So I know that the utilities are actively working, with the relevant state agencies on planning for the future of the grid and how the grid needs to be upgraded and modernized, to support the level of demand, that we're going to be facing. So I don't know the details of where they are on that, but I know those conversations and those plans are well underway. And I agree with you in terms of, we need to be prepared around security issues, but I don't have any, other further insights I can share, and in terms of specific plans, but I agree that's something else we need to be obviously planning for.
Yep. Would anyone else like to comment, or should we move to the next question?
I'm happy.
Okay, great. Alan, go ahead.
I got so many things spinning in my mind, I'm not sure where to start, but a couple of little quick things. One is, and Jason, you made me think of this, that I gather that.
Oh, yeah, you know what, let's do this, because we have viewers at home and they definitely can't hear anyone not speaking into a microphone. I will, I'll bring it to you. And
Okay.
we'll just do it this way.
Great. I've gathered from what I'm reading that in fact the offshore wind, the Vineyard Wind, is going to actually start producing energy before the end of this year. So that's exciting, and that's just the beginning of a really large development. So that's really encouraging. Another little detail relating to what Walter was saying in a way, although I agree with what Walter was saying, is that from what I've read, wind generation, like offshore wind generation at nighttime, is actually stronger than during the day, and of course solar is stronger during the day than at night. So that's kind of a lucky little balance that helps a bit. And another little detail, a number of years ago in Shirley, Massachusetts, I visited what they call a flow battery that National Grid was experimenting with. It was really quite a large battery storage system with multiple shipping containers holding the components. So, one more thing, also out in Shirley, as an abutter, I got a notice about upgrades to the major transmission lines that they're doing there for this greater capacity. So stuff is actually happening now, which is really encouraging. But that isn't at all what I wanted to say. I hope I don't mind my using your first names, because I just want to say that I think Jason and Talia and Pat are all great public servants, and I see them as friends, and I've talked to them for over the years quite a lot. And I think we're so fortunate that we have people that really do care about lots of issues. And I happen to be a climate person, but there's all these other issues. Pat's a great example, because she's not primarily a climate advocate, as I am, but she's an advocate for stuff that I really care about, but I can't do it all, and she can't do it all. So I love the way we're all working in our own ways, and I think we're all supporting it. So the last thing I want to say is that there are 3 bills. I'm part of 350 Mass, and we have 3 priority bills we actually have 7, but three top priority ones. And one of them is really, and Jason, you were talking about housing. One is the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund. That provides short-term, not sustained, but short-term substantial funding. So that's for renovations of buildings, especially for low-income housing, but with that in mind. But anyway, it's an important housing improvement funding short-term. Longer term is the HERO Act that was also mentioned, and that comes out of an increase of deeds excise fees, and that would really sustain, because it's a change in how the money's coming. That would really be sustained. So that'd be fantastic, and so I hope you can support that. I'm sure you would. The last one is the Climate Change Superfund, which is a really exciting but kind of a long-term, long-shot prospect. But basically where the industry that has created all the expenses that we have now in healthcare and all of the climate impacts that we're having to pay money to try to survive now, to have them have some responsibility for that. And that could, and some states like New York and Maryland have started in this process. But if Massachusetts can get behind the bill that's called an act establishing a climate change superfund and promoting polluters' responsibility, this polluters' responsibility as opposed to producers, I really think that's a very, very valuable thing to support also. And your offices already have information about this, and thanks. Sorry, that's not a question.
Sir, did you have your hand up?
Oh, but can I talk about that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I do actually want to talk about that. And that is that this is something that makes me happy because we've started identifying the scale of the investment that has to go into this, and it makes me very scared because we do not have the will in this state. So the HERO Act involves doubling the excise tax to spend on housing and the environment. People worked for 7 years to raise $1 billion in taxes for transportation and education. The new governor's priority, one of her top priorities, was cutting taxes by $1 billion. You can't spend money twice. You cut taxes, you don't have as much money. There is a theory that cutting taxes leads to more production. These taxes do not lead to economic development, these tax cuts. And we tomorrow, well, for Thursday for us, tomorrow for the House, we'll be voting on a tax cut package of, I can't tell yet, but around $650 million. That is double what the HERO tax would raise, HERO excise tax would raise. It is, well, it's a lot less than the cost recovery superfund. But when we're in this mood that we have to cut taxes as a top priority, how are we going to increase the excise tax on real estate? Every real estate interest in the state, which is not busy already fighting rent control and transfer tax and things like that, will be there. You think we're going to be raising taxes on real estate transfers this session? That's why I said it's intersectional. If we don't have the will to provide the resources, the revenue, and the tax income, we will not have enough resources to pay for the things that we need to do to improve the environment, to improve public transit, and to improve housing, among other things. Those are the things that make Massachusetts competitive. Having affordable housing, well, not having affordable housing makes us non-competitive, and if you live enough time, I'm going to talk about how we are outliers, not in taxes. We are right in the middle, according to the Tax Foundation. We are at the very top in housing costs and unaffordability, in elder insecurity, and in child care expenses, and in traffic delays. We are second in the country in traffic delays. Every second of traffic delay is emissions. So that is really hard. And just quickly about the Superfund, it is based on setting up the possibility of strict liability based on, I think, essentially market share, suing the gas and oil companies for their contributions over the many years to air pollution and climate change. $75 billion is a lot of money over 10 years. That would be great. I have been working since the beginning of my time in the legislature to try to pass a law that would hold lead manufacturers accountable and help pay for the repairs that are required in homes and schools and other buildings because of the intentional marketing of lead paint as safe, as good for kids, and as the best possible solution. Not happening. Not happening. There's not enough. The public will is way different. So we need to change, we need to not just think about what's the bill we're going to support, but how can we change the culture so that people think that government can be a player in making their lives better. So many people don't think that. So many people might be right because we have so many, the T is an example. People say, why spend money on the T? It doesn't work. If you don't spend money, it for sure wouldn't work. But the idea that taxes are a burden instead of how we invest together to make all of our lives better in a way that none of us can do individually. None of us can get public transit. None of us can clear out the traffic on the way to Boston. None of us can make it possible for maybe those of us who have extra rooms can let people come live in our homes and take care of us when we get old. But we can't solve the social problems that we face. We certainly can't solve climate change if we continue to think that paying taxes is such a burden that nobody should have to do it. And if you don't watch out, I'm going to talk about short-term capital gains. And think about the money that I talked about for different solutions. We are cutting the short-term capital gains less than the House wanted to do. But if you add up short-term capital gains and single sales factor, which, well, I won't talk about the values of each of them, but it's $100 million a year.
So, Senator, if we I just want to make sure I know there are quite a few questions out here.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, absolutely. And I apologize for turning straight to the next question before seeing if any of you had
I'm not
any
gonna
comments. No, feel free. And I think one, did you? Yeah, I think you had a question earlier.
Thank you. So this is going to be a question and a very short one. So we have the Inflation Reduction Act, and we have the infrastructure bill. So we have tons of money presumably coming from the federal government at some point. What are our plans for taking advantage of this funding, and what priorities have been set at the state level and the municipal level for implementing some of the projects that we need desperately using these funds?
So one of the things we have done through the state legislature, working with the governor, is for some of the federal money, some of it's based on formulas, so Massachusetts will just get our share based on formulas, but others are competitive grants, and typically in order to get those, there has to be a state match of a certain percentage. So one of the things we're doing is making sure that we have appropriated or allocated all of the state money necessary to maximize our ability to compete for those federal dollars from either the Inflation Reduction Act or the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So we're trying to maximize our ability. Those bills are complicated. I'm not an expert on them, but there's lots of different provisions. I do know that the relevant state agencies are, fully digesting them and figuring out exactly, how we go about maximizing our share of those revenues. And then they will be, communicating and coordinating with our cities and towns, municipal officials, and other entities that are the entities that would apply for and in some cases compete for that funding. But one really good example, actually, this is very appropriate for Ken as our sustainability manager. One change the Inflation Reduction Act made is it made tax credits, which are typically only available to for-profit businesses, right, available to nonprofits. So we've never had that before. It's basically a mechanism which would provide funding. So nonprofits and municipalities, I'm told, are going to be able to compete for this this funding that can then be used for building projects for clean heat and for electric vehicle infrastructure and so on. So that's a great example of what we need to tap into.
Can I just say one quick thing
You may
about
wanna
that? Because
comment. You may
it's
know
just
more
funny
about
that it's interesting because right across the street, at this moment, the select board is debating whether to take advantage of one of those credits as we think about solar at the new Lynch Elementary School. In the past, as Senator Lewis mentioned, we wouldn't have been able to take advantage of the 30% investment tax credit to purchase a solar system. But now, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we can. So it's making purchase rather than lease of these large solar systems actually an option for municipalities. Sorry to interrupt.
So you see, the select board already heard us tonight and is acting on it, so that's great.
Did anyone else want to comment? No need to, but if just, I don't want to cut you off.
I think there was a question all the way in the back.
Yep, was it you? Yep, here we go.
I'll defer to the lady.
Oh, okay. Very gentlemanlike of you.
Hi, so I have two questions. The first one is about what are we doing to protect some of the green spaces that we have at both the state and municipal level? I was reading recently about a redevelopment of the Shattuck Hospital in Franklin Park, and it just seemed like a development that large would be at odds with some of the work that we're trying to do to protect green spaces in this state. And then rent control came up, and I just wanted to say that as a landlord, I am planning climate upgrades to my property, but it is difficult to fund those if I cannot increase the rents to cover some of those costs. Even though I would be bearing some of those costs out of my own pocket, I do need to share some of those costs as well with the tenants. And then my last question is from my daughter, Clara. Do you want to ask? She wanted to ask how more people can use electric cars instead of gas cars.
Thank you.
Someone want to go first? Green space.
I've finished, I think I've used up my time.
So green space is great. Love green space. We're obviously enormously fortunate to have the Middlesex Fells in our backyard, and we're very active in a Middlesex Fells caucus, which seeks to find ways to support and preserve, the fells and for future generations. I think what you're getting at, it is sort of, I think Senator Jalen was getting at this as well. There are some difficult choices, we need to make. I mean, we have climate goals, we have open space, green sustainability goals. We have a critical housing crisis, in our state, and we also need to build more housing and affordable housing. So, there's been a big fight, some of you may be aware of, related to the building of our new regional vocational school, right, which is in Wakefield. And there's a lot of people who are upset that in order to build that school, it is requiring some trees to be cut and some, demolition of some of that property. They are going to replace that with new trees, but it's not quite the same thing. But, we have a critical need for a new, modern, first-rate technical vocational school also to serve the needs of our students. So there are these sort of, difficult trade-offs you sometimes have to make. I think we try to be smart about it and, try to make the best decisions we can where we balance these competing priorities. One of the things that the governor talked about a lot, and she actually just rolled out today, is a working group, a commission that is going to look at reforms around siting and permitting. Eyes glaze over, it's like zoning, right? But it's actually a very important issue because, one of the reasons that we've had trouble moving forward on a lot of clean energy infrastructure projects is because zoning and permitting and siting is very complicated. It takes place at the local level, the state level, the federal level. And, so one of the challenges is, particularly for progressive Democrats, and, I think we all count ourselves in that category, we have a lot of competing priorities. And sometimes they can be in conflict with each other, and we have to face those head on. What was your second question? It was rent control?
Yeah.
I think you brought that up, so if you want to
I
refer
don't
to
know
that.
why I brought that up, but,
but,
well, just because there have to be some solutions so that people can live near their jobs. I would just say that that's related to my other point that I was going to say about green space, is that it's hard to do state legislation on almost anything. But the good part of that is there's an opportunity for local control. And there's an opportunity for local control. For example, at the regional high school, there's an opportunity in zoning, and there are trade-offs, as Jason said. Absolutely. Right now in Somerville, the most densely populated city in the Northeast, at least, there's trade-offs every day between more housing and less green space. And there are strong advocates on both, and there's winners and losers in every decision. But the zoning and the zoning changes and variances, that's an opportunity for people at the local level. You can make more of a difference at the local level, and you know that here in Winchester. So it's a frustrating thing that you can't get us to do everything, but it's a good thing that you can use your power at the local level to really try to solve some of these problems. And the same thing is true of rent control. I would just say that no one is proposing statewide rent control. No one. And I just leave that alone.
I think to kind of build off both of those points, it is really important for us to work together with the communities and for the people within the communities to work together. Something that comes to mind is the Stoneham and Winchester downtown redesigns. I know that there's been hostility on both sides about where to put in bike lanes versus where to keep their streets the way they are, where to preserve the green space. And having these conversations and talking with each other are really important, and without getting hostile and without blaming one another for differing opinions, but kind of working collaboratively to come to solutions together. It's going to be very important for kind of tackling such a big issue.
Can I just, in the interest of respecting our panelists' time, we're at the end of the scheduled event, but I'm wondering if, and I don't want to twist your arm too hard here, but do you think you can stay a little bit longer? It's currently basically 8 o'clock. Is 8:15 a possibility?
Works for me.
Okay, great. And I think you were patiently waiting for your turn.
I have a question. Climate is a worldwide construct, clearly defined geographically, with specific parameters assigned to different environmental issues. I understand that the state has a climatologist. I also understand that the geography of the state has 4 basic subdivisions with different climates associated as one goes from the Cape to North Shore to the Taconics out to the New York border. My question is, in defining what climate change will be to Massachusetts, has the climatologist been involved in looking at rainfall, in looking at vegetation, in looking at economics, how people in the state make their living? Is it manufacturing? Is it farming? What kind of farming? Is it cattle raising, which is classified as farming, or is it growing foodstuffs? So my question is, has anyone ever thought to define what climate change means to this state, the entire state?
Not sure exactly how to answer your question. But what I would say, and you should jump in, I mean, one thing that we have done, I think, pretty successfully is conduct municipal vulnerability preparedness assessments across our state. They're typically done at the local level by cities and towns. Sometimes they've done regionally. But we've had a very successful program at the state level to fund those. And so Winchester's done one, for example, and many, many communities have. And those do look at the impacts of climate change in that specific community, whether it's heat, flooding, other impacts, what are the vulnerabilities, and then put a plan together for how we're going to address those vulnerabilities. So that is work that has been going on and is continuing to go on, you know, all across all parts of the Commonwealth.
You can look at migration of shellfish. You can look at disease migration, whether it's Eastern equine encephalitis, whether it's new diseases coming down from New Hampshire, new viral forms. This has the potential of spreading, and it is a climate function. It's induced by climate change. And so I think we want to know more about the specific climates involved and what is changing.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that type of work is happening within our state government and within academia and so on. I don't think we are knowledgeable or expert on exactly where that stands, but I think it is that kind of analysis and assessment of what those climate impacts are going to be on our state are definitely happening.
Thank you.
Yep.
Question right here.
I want to say I appreciate the discussion about the intersectionality of many of these dimensions, and would ask for an update on where things stand with respect to accessory dwelling units, the zoning for single-family housing here, and the not in my backyard to loan for this kind of density, affordability, near public transportation. I think it all relates to, and be interested in where we stand on that.
I think it will be in the governor's housing bond. I think it will be in the housing bond bill that the governor will file, and I think that we will probably support it. And I do want to, just being very, very local, that there are so few backyards in Somerville, and that they are almost the only green space we have, that there needs to be some ability to say they don't expect, maybe in some places you don't expand the footprint. But I certainly, speaking as an older person and for the Elder Affairs Committee, we do know that it's part of the solution for families with aging relatives or with kids growing up and need someplace to stay. My own family, my daughter and three granddaughters live with us. So, but we don't have they live with us.
Yep.
I think we've, speaking of, so Representative Day and Senator Lewis have also been working really closely with the town of Winchester to figure out where we can put in some more of these larger complexes to house people. We've been working closely with the MBTA right near Winchester Station. The MBTA owns a parcel of land, which with the help of Senator Lewis and Representative Day, the town is now able to buy this land at a going market rate so that they're able to produce some of this affordable housing units. So we're really excited to see where this project goes, especially having it be so close to the commuter rail and so close to the MBTA is kind of an ideal project that I think that this can serve as an example for the whole state. And I think having more conversations like this to get more of these projects going is in the future for Winchester and Stoneham, and we're really excited to see where it goes.
And just, I don't know if you know this already, Winchester hasn't implemented an ADU bylaw, right? Like accessory dwelling units. I think it was town meeting last year?
Oh.
Was it last year, right? So that does exist now. There's some parameters around it, but, so that exists locally, and what Senator Jalen was talking about is whether we would pass something statewide that would provide like a by right option. And so that is definitely one of the ideas under consideration.
Very good.
Hi. I'm not sure this is a legislative proposal here, but I just thought something you might think about and maybe just reject out of pocket. And this might be addressed partly to Talia, but certainly to all three of you for your opinions. But to Talia, because she was talking that Representative Day is proposing a I don't know what it's called, manufacturer's responsibility for packaging, that we don't like all of this excess single-use plastic packaging. And so what should we do about that? We should charge the manufacturer and make them responsible for it. And they can decrease their use of it and therefore avoid that charge. Okay, so I'm concerned regarding electrification of home heating. The parameters in the bills are that we're going to, electrify 1 million or 2 million or something like that houses by 2040 or 2050. The rate at which it's happening now is like, probably 5%. I don't know, just making that up. But it's probably in single digits, the rate at which it's happening versus the rate at which our goal requires it to happen. I've looked into getting a heat pump. We have gas. Most people have gas heat. And there's great incentives for purchasing a new heat pump. In other words, if you buy a heat pump and it'll pay some thousands or 30% or whatever, both federal and state level. The thing is that once you have a heat pump, even if you got the heat pump for cheap, you still have to pay for your electricity to run the heat pump. And if because of the relatively high cost of electricity here and the relatively low cost of gas here, if you got a heat pump, when it gets down below 30 degrees or something like that, well, you're paying more to run your heat pump with electricity than you would have paid to heat your house with a gas furnace. So even though you're getting all kinds of incentives to help you buy the heat pump, most people, if they do the math, or a lot of people are going to say, I don't want a heat pump. I'd rather continue to heat with gas because it is cheaper in the long run, year after year. It's cheaper. So my question or proposal is, don't we need to make the playing field different between the cost of gas and electricity such that people want to get a heat pump because the electricity is going to be cheaper to heat their house than the gas would have been? And if that's true, how about this as a proposal? Why don't we have a surcharge on gas, kind of like we would have a surcharge on packaging, something we don't want. We don't want people to be using gas forever. We want to phase gas out, and we want to phase it out rapidly, like completely by 2050. Why don't we have a surcharge on gas, and then what will we do with it? Well, there's all kinds of wonderful things you can do with it, but here's one thing you could do with it. You could give it to subsidize electricity. So the price of gas would be higher, price of electricity would be lower, people would be just doing everything they could to get a heat pump. So I just wonder what you think of that idea.
Not a crazy idea at all. You're talking about a carbon tax, right? And, yep. Yeah, it's interesting, actually, that there was a lot of discussion about the idea of a carbon tax, which would essentially be assessed on fossil fuels a number of years ago. In fact, many of you know our colleague, Senator Mike Barrett, who chairs the Telecommunications Utilities Committee. He's been one of the lead authors of the legislation we talked about. This was the topic he used to talk about constantly.
Did he stop?
Well, that's what I was about to say. It is interesting and kind of surprising that focus on the idea of a carbon tax, it hasn't been there in recent years. I don't hear about it from advocacy groups. Senator Barrett stopped talking about it. I've always been a believer that absolutely that would make sense. I mean, you have to be careful about how you treat low-income families, and there'd be some redistribution like you were describing. But I think there's a way to make that work. But essentially, if you want to reduce the use of a societal ill, if you want to reduce the use of tobacco products, right? We have a high tax on cigarettes. So it is interesting, and I would put it back out to you folks. A lot of people in the room are part of ELM and 350 Mass and Sustainable Middlesex, and why there hasn't been more of a conversation or a focus. Even though it's clearly not got any traction at the federal level, but there's no reason it couldn't get traction at the state level. I mean, I've always been a long-time supporter.
Taxes.
Except maybe just that, again, it's a tax, but that is interesting that you raised it, because again, in the last few years, there's just been very little conversation, and I think we should resuscitate that.
Just if I might just mention on that topic, there is a bill from Representative Driscoll called an act relative to a clean heat standard, which would, it's not really a carbon tax as you're noting, but it would essentially require gas, oil, and propane distributors to increasingly help their customers switch to electric solutions and to greater energy efficiency. So from that standpoint, it would start to shift back the imbalance that you're talking about, where gas is so cheap and electricity is so expensive. So I know that groups like the Green Energy Consumers Alliance have targeted that bill as their top priority, and I think it's garnered quite a bit of attention.
I think on that, I think it's definitely an idea worth exploring. But again, as senators and representatives, they rely a lot on you guys to kind of bring these ideas forward. I know regarding the clean heat standard, over the past probably week or so, I've probably received 30 emails in opposition to it and not a single one in favor of it. And so having these conversations, I think it's important to raise these ideas, because I think that it is an idea worth exploring, and we kind of rely on you guys a lot to use your voices to advocate for the changes that you want to see.
Important point.
Thanks. So I know we're short on time, so I'll keep my comment to one question, one comment. So I think we all agree we're in a climate emergency, that we're all doing these good little things, and some are significant, but it's not enough, right? Climate's getting worse faster than we thought. 2050 is a long ways off, right, to get to net zero carbon. So what is the status from a state policy perspective? So think of Massachusetts trying to be more of a, we're doing well relative to maybe 50 states, but we could be doing a lot more. What's the status of developing a very concrete plan, near-term plan over the next 5-10 years that gets us towards carbon drawdown, that gets us to really doing significant things and making the hard decisions, like mobilizing for war, like World War II, like making really hard decisions, increasing taxes, but putting that plan in place and getting Governor Healy's, chief climate, who I think said this summer, we don't have a plan yet. So what is the status of getting a plan in place and making those hard decisions to, put more taxes together, because I know it takes money, but making the sacrifices?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, we're not going to get anything done if we don't have a plan and we build consensus around that. The legislation that we passed, I described at the beginning 2 major bills, call for exactly that. So there is a requirement legally that our state government needs to have these plans developed, in all the different sectors of the economy, buildings, transportation, utilities, and exactly how we're going to meet these targets. And it's not just net zero by 2050, there's interim targets we have to hit. The governor herself has set a goal of 100% clean electricity generation by 2030, actually. So I think we've been a little bit patient because Governor Healy is a new governor, new administration, so we've given her a little time, but I guess we're starting to get a little impatient, that we need to start to see some of the meat on the bones of these plans. So I do think we're going to see more and more coming from her and her team and from state government agencies, in the months ahead. And if we don't see it, we're definitely going to be raising our voices in the legislature, and folks in the advocates should be doing the same to say exactly that. These plans are required by law. They need to be developed, they need to be public, and we need to then be moving forward with implementation.
I think I might give the last question to one of the youngest members of the audience here. Here, I'll hold it for you. Go ahead.
How can we get an electric school buses?
Ooh, how can we get some electric school buses here? Good question.
Yes, that's a good one.
I think that is a great idea and a great question. I'm sure the senators can probably speak more on this, but I know that our omnibus climate bill that came out last session had guidelines for kind of electrifying our school fleets. So it's definitely something that we're looking into.
And if I'm not mistaken, we were talking before about some of the federal funds that are being made available. I believe there's a pot of money in there, I don't know if you can speak to this, Ken, or others, that is specifically for electric school buses. So they're absolutely, hopefully we can start to get some buses and maybe even some in Winchester. Great idea.
Yeah, there is a lot of federal money. A challenge is that we don't own our own fleet here in Winchester of electric buses, so we'd have to get a regional service provider to agree to provide them to more than one customer. But the prices are coming down. There is federal money. I think it's definitely the future. So hopefully before you're done with school, you'll be able to ride on an electric school bus.
What do you think of that?
Okay, well, in respect for the panelists' time, I just want to thank them all for coming. Thank you all for coming. Let's hear it for our panelists. And I hope to see you at the rest of the Climate Solutions Week events. They're on the flyer on the table right there. Thanks so much.